What are some of the most interesting or surprising cases that you've tended to?
I'll tell you about one that is not necessarily life-threatening.
Okay.
But it's pretty urgent. It was a poor young lady who was very, very upset, in a lot of distress and clutching the side of her head.
Okay.
And she was screaming, it hurts, get it out, get it out. And we realized that there was a cockroach in her ear.
Really?
Yes. We squirted lots of olive oil in there.
Oh my gosh.
And it stopped wriggling and the patient calmed down.
Oh
And then I had to overcome my personal fear of cockroaches.
Okay, let's go.
I'm Nicole Lee and welcome back to You Never Know, where we talk about life, career, change, and the stories of people who have taken the unconventional road and embraced the unknowns. If you liked my content and podcast so far, remember to like, comment, or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this to help me create more relevant content for you in the future. It means so much to me. Today's guest is a woman who's living on the edge of chaos, quite literally. She's an emergency medical doctor that thrives in the high-stakes world of the ER, juggling critical cases, chaotic nights, and the occasional Netflix binge. Born in Malaysia, trained in Australia, and working now in Singapore, her path has been anything but ordinary. But behind all the adrenaline and the scrubs is also a mother of two, whose children believe that she drives an ambulance to work, and that tells you everything about her grounded presence, her sense of humor, passion, and grit. I'm super excited to be having this conversation today, where we're going to go behind the scenes of what it's actually like to be in the real ER. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome LIEW Wai Wai to You Never Know. Welcome to the show, Wai Wai.
Hi.
I can't believe you're here. we actually met 2 weeks ago.
Less than 2 weeks?
Oh, was it less than 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
We met at a storytelling event.
Yes.
Where we were supporting a mutual friend. Mm-hmm. And it seems very random, but nothing is random.
No.
Yeah. No. And I remember we were sitting next to each other. And
the popcorn disaster.
We were sharing popcorn.
Yes.
And I think we were laughing really loudly and it was so fun. We were with another new friend as well.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah, it was great. It was so fun. And I remember because we just met. So I actually asked you, hey, Wai, so which industry are you in? Right? And then you said, guess. I wake up very early in the morning. I think you said that.
I think I specifically said I meet people on the worst day of their lives.
Yeah, I think you said that, but I didn't get it. So I was like, are you in the media? Right? Because honestly, you didn't look like a doctor, right? And then he's like, no, guess again. And she's like, I'm an ER doctor. And I said, I have to interview you for my podcast. Yeah, and then you were like, let's do it.
Yeah, I love it.
I loved your, enthusiasm and your energy and your vibe. So I'm really happy that you're here and to do this and to tell your story. Yeah, so thank you so much. So,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, I wanted to ask how it all began. First of all, I had to ask, do you really drive an ambulance to work?
No, I don't drive an ambulance to work, but I do take a very expensive form of transportation.
What?
Provided by the Singapore government.
Oh, really?
The MRT.
Oh,
it's perfect. It goes directly to the basement of the hospital I work in.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
but my kids think I drive an ambulance.
What do you tell them when they ask you, hey, mommy, do you drive an ambulance to work?
I think they probably picked it up from one of the cartoons that they were watching because there was an ambulance in the cartoon and they said, oh, mommy, you work in the hospital. So does that mean you drive the ambulance to work?
So funny.
And my 6-year-old once declared, mommy, when I grow up, I want to drive an ambulance. And I said, why? Because everyone has to give way to me. And I said, oh dear, I think there's a lot more to it than driving an ambulance.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk more later about how, you deal with kids and your work as well. But I wanted to ask, you were born in Malaysia.
Yes.
Right? Then you studied in Australia and then now you're working in Singapore. Take us a bit through your journey of how you began this whole medical journey.
Yeah, so I'm from Malaysia. So
which part of Malaysia?
KL.
Okay.
Yeah. So grew up
Kuala
in
Lumpur.
Kuala Lumpur, more specifically PJ,
Okay.
Petaling Jaya,
Okay.
which is an adjacent town to Kuala Lumpur. And at one point, I realized that I was going to go to medical school. But in Malaysia, typically a lot of Malaysians do go overseas for
Okay.
medical school.
Okay.
So my parents sent me to Australia, Melbourne, where I basically did a year of college and then went on to medical school at Monash University.
Okay, which is in which part of Australia?
Melbourne.
In Melbourne, okay.
Yeah,
Melbourne,
yeah.
Australia. So I'm curious because I'm curious about why you wanted to go to medical school in the first place.
I think a lot of it was the fact that growing up, there was a few professions that were considered noble and good.
Yes.
And, Asian parents, right? If
Yeah.
you're not a lawyer, you have to be an engineer.
Banker.
Or doctor. So it was one of those few that I kind of went, I guess I could be a doctor. And I kind of rolled with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it was really that expectation either from your parents or yourself to actually be one of those prestigious professions?
Very much so.
Interesting.
Very much so.
I get it.
Yeah, but I went to medical school and I realized that I liked it.
Okay.
I'm good at it. So I thrived. I enjoyed myself very much.
Yeah, tell me about that because it isn't easy to graduate and become a doctor, right? I mean, it is a lot of things you have to memorize,
Yeah.
right?
In that sense, maybe I was lucky that I went to Monash because Monash University's medical school degree is known to be a little bit more practical,
Okay.
very hands-on, as well as it's probably what shaped quite a few of us to end up in more diverse careers. The running joke is that Melbourne University in the same city is a lot more traditional. They produce the more studious,
Right.
traditional doctors, whereas Monash tends to some of us are a little bit more out there and creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why I never would have guessed you were a doctor. Yeah, that's why I thought you were a journalist or something,
Wow, funny that you said that. That was actually my first career intention.
Oh,
So I always wanted to be a journalist.
Okay.
Growing up. But my parents were like, what are you going to eat?
interesting. So did you then feel, okay, so you actually changed what you studied because of also what they expected?
Yes.
Right.
So I think especially in my generation, there was a lot of you need certain stability.
Yes.
And so, being that my parents funded my education, I kind of rolled with that.
Okay. So then I'm curious because I think we talked the other day over coffee and you mentioned about emergency medicine because I don't know that much about the whole thing, right? So I'm like a newbie, I want to learn more about the thought process. So emergency medicine is basically a specialization.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
How do you even decide to choose emergency medicine? Because you have to study for how many years before you actually specialize?
So I'm not technically a full emergency medicine specialist.
Okay.
So I've worked in emergency medicine for very long, more than 10 years.
Okay.
Before I moved to Singapore this round,
Right.
I was training in emergency medicine specialty in Australia.
Okay.
However, as we mentioned earlier, children, I had babies and it was COVID.
Yeah.
And the attempt to complete my specialization got a bit too much.
Okay.
So at that point, I kind of pulled back and said, let's look at how things are.
Right.
And I realized that I didn't necessarily need the specialization to work in emergency because the way most emergency departments work is there are doctors of many different ranks in the hierarchy.
Right.
And so it's very important to know that good junior level doctors in emergency department keep the place running.
Right.
Because the reality is most hospitals, but particularly the emergency department, even most junior doctors are your first point of contact with medical staff.
Right.
So at this point, I currently work in a junior capacity.
Okay.
But as someone who has a lot of experience,
Yes.
Naturally my bosses at work kind of understand that my skill sets are also slightly different.
Right. Is that normal for someone to not have that specialization to actually do emergency?
There's a mix. I think a lot of us, there's a mix.
Okay.
And typically emergency physicians across the world, whether in Australia or whether in Singapore,
Yeah.
were known to be those with slightly diverse careers. We don't usually take the very straightforward route.
Tell me more about that.
Uh,
Why?
I think it's also to do with the fact that the joke is that most emergency physicians have a slightly shorter attention span.
Really? That's why you're suited for it.
Yeah, because you're kind of like, you deal with a case, you wrap them up, and then you go, all right, next, moving on.
Interesting.
Yeah,
so the doctors who are in emergency rooms tend to have more diverse experiences in their careers.
In careers, in life.
Oh.
So one of the emergency departments where I was a student in Australia,
Yeah.
half the time they were only working there part-time.
Oh.
And one of them was a coder. He would work in coding.
Interesting.
And he would write code for Microsoft and things like that. Another one ran a cafe up the road from the hospital. So every time he came for shift, he would like bring trays of pastries and coffee for everyone.
And that's very typical.
It's quite common.
Oh.
Yeah. For emergency physicians to have something outside.
Yeah. I'm very curious because, no one likes to go into the emergency room. And therefore, I'm just thinking, why would a doctor want to work in an emergency room? Like, what was your inspiration? Why do you choose to go and dive straight into this chaotic
So I
place?
probably am like most typical emergency doctors. I like to see my patients and kind of like sort them out and move on.
Right.
So I don't relish seeing the same patient today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or maybe for like the next 5-10 years.
Yeah.
Where they come in for follow-up and repeat visits.
Yes.
I'm quite happy to go, oh, you're bleeding? I'll stitch you up and I'll send you on your way.
Right.
And
Does
someone
that
else
tell
can
you something
follow up.
about your personality as well? I'm curious.
I think I probably am that sort of, spontaneous and let's get things done. I'm a doer kind of person.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So why? Okay. So you studied in Australia. You worked there as well.
Yes, I did.
So what made you move to Singapore? Because you know why I say that? Because a lot of Singaporeans love Australia.
Yeah.
They aspire to live there because of the work-life balance.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, why would you then leave a seemingly better environment?
I think
for Singapore,
the reality of raising young children in Australia really hit us when we were there because we had our second baby during COVID.
Okay.
And during COVID, the world was in lockdown. So we couldn't really get help.
Right.
And we didn't have grandparents.
Okay.
And even with like childcare and things like that, there were a lot of restrictions.
Yeah.
And at one point, we realized that raising children needs a village.
Okay. Yes.
So I think that's when we really went, where can we potentially have a village?
Okay.
And at that point, we looked around and we said, we need to consider our options. And we landed on Singapore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes a lot of practical sense. And when you have a family.
Because now the grandparents who are in Malaysia, they are just like a 4-hour bus ride away or a 1-hour flight.
Okay.
And acknowledging the fact that for us coming to Singapore, we made that conscious decision to hire a helper. And I always tell anyone who listen to me, my helper is essentially the third parent in this family. And my girls know that she's very much a third parent. And I expect my girls to give her the level of respect.
I see.
As well.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's very smart. I think when you need help, especially as a parent, as a mom, while you're also working full time, especially in your role, then you do need to know that there are certain environments, cities, countries that actually support you in that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's dive deeper into the ER, right? The juicy parts. I think there's so much to talk about.
Yes.
But maybe just to start off with the first question, and you can roll with it, right? I'm sure like so many things happen in an ER. I know sometimes you even text me at like 1 a.m., 4 a.m. You have so many different shifts as well.
Yeah.
What are your working hours like?
Yeah. So to understand how hospitals work, which I have had to explain to my kids as well, because they were under the impression that hospitals close at night. Just like shops.
Yes.
And but the reality is you've got sick patients who need to be looked after 24/7. And particularly in the emergency department, it needs to be manned at all times.
Okay.
So in that sense, there's no locks on the doors.
Okay.
The hospital I worked in opened last year.
Okay.
And since then, we have been running, we hit the ground running.
Yeah.
So in the department itself,
Yeah.
there's usually at least about 8 to 12 doctors
Okay.
on duty in the emergency department
Okay. At any one time?
at any one time.
Okay.
And then it's open 24/7.
Okay.
So we can never close the doors and say, no, we're shut.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to work in shifts.
Okay.
So the shifts have usually there's the morning, the evenings, and the nights.
Mm-hmm.
And then in between, we kind of have some overlaps that we call the swing shift. And then you have to cover because there always needs to be a
Someone
certain
there.
number of doctors.
Okay,
to
so
cover.
you alternate between what morning shifts, night shifts, and
And
in
evening
bet-
shifts.
evening
Yes,
shifts, right? So
yes.
what would the night shift look like?
The night shift usually starts at about 10 p.m.
Okay,
and then it stretches into the morning till about 9 in the morning.
okay,
Yeah.
and then the morning shift is
And the morning shifts with the overlap starts at 8,
okay,
and then 8 would go to about 4 or 5.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm actually had a lot of respect because, you know, like I remember meeting you for coffee and you're like, I have to take a nap now because it was afternoon. I have to get ready for my night shift.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
How do you actually juggle this sleep?
I think it takes a lot of planning. I've been very privileged at work because my bosses have been quite supportive with my young kids. So I've managed to work around my shifts.
Yeah,
I even have colleagues who are husband and wife
yeah.
in the same department.
Wow.
You know, actually, there's at least two pairs in my department, and it takes a lot of careful planning.
Wow.
Because there is childcare, there is shifts, there is overlap.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that is the reality of shift work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us what goes on behind the scenes in an ER, right? I mean, you can start however you want, but I'm just curious, like, what actually goes on? Like, what are the types of cases that you see? Because I can't imagine, you know, the sort of surprises that you might have.
I mean, bread and butter. People come to emergency when you're feeling sick, right? So we're talking about chest pain,
Yeah.
stomach pains, headaches. Those are usually the bread and butter, you know,
Right.
or injuries. That's where the accident comes in. You know,
Right.
you might have cut yourself or car accident,
Okay.
or you fell and you hurt yourself or you broke a bone.
Yeah.
And those are usually the things you think about. But something I do like to remind my friends who are not in the medical field
Yeah.
is that when you come to an emergency department,
Yeah.
you don't want to be the one that gets rushed in.
Right.
Because if you're the one that's getting rushed in, it usually means there's something very, very wrong with you.
Oh, tell me more. As in, you don't want to get rushed in, as in, you don't want to.
So you don't want to come and go like, oh, I have this thing. And then the nurse takes one look at you and say, oh, and then like pushes you ahead and you skip the queue and you're straight into a cubicle.
You wouldn't know, would you?
You wouldn't necessarily know.
Yeah.
Yes.
You wouldn't know whether you needed to be rushed in and
Yeah.
pushed through, right? Or what sort of cases would be rushed in?
Heart attacks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So cardiovascular disease is definitely on the rise.
Okay.
I think lifestyle, stress levels as well.
Right.
Yeah. I'm starting to see heart attacks in younger and younger patients actually.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and that would definitely require immediate attention.
most of the time, 99% of the time, if you're having a heart attack, it would be, let's get you in and sorted.
Yeah, so how does it work? So because I the other question I wanted to ask is, are people actually going to the ER or the A&E, accident and emergency, when actually it's not required?
I think the public is getting better.
Right.
There's been a good level of education and people are realizing that there's, you know, what should they go in for? And I think, you know, everyone's working on that because we don't want to clog up a system that should be serving the urgent and the immediate cases. Yeah. But even then, when you come, there's a system which we call triage. So triage is where you get categorized into like very urgent, semi-urgent, and you probably should have gone to your GP.
Right, because earlier you said that a lot of people come in with chest pains or maybe colds, or, you know, do those things warrant them coming into the ER?
So chest pain, definitely we'll be very happy to see you
Okay.
in the emergency department.
Okay.
Cough and colds, usually will be okay to see you, but you
Right.
have to understand that there'll be a wait.
Right. So you won't actually turn people away.
We don't turn people away
Okay.
from the ER.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's more like if it's not so urgent, you have to wait
You do
for-
get a different priority level. Yeah.
Right.
So when my patients get upset, say if they've been waiting for like 2-3 hours,
Right.
my response to them is usually, well, actually, you would probably be grateful that you are not the heart attack that's being rushed in right now, or we're
Yes.
doing CPR on you right
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
to just resuscitate you.
Right. So I'm very curious about what are some of the most interesting or surprising cases that you've tended to?
Let's see. Do you want to have
Which category?
yeah, which category? I'll tell you about one that
Like that surprised you the most?
I'll tell you about one that is not necessarily life threatening.
Okay.
But it's pretty urgent.
Okay.
So
Not life-threatening,
not
but
life-threatening,
urgent.
but urgent.
Okay, tell me.
A couple of years ago now, I think this would have been nearly 8 years ago now. I was towards the end of my night shift. I was still pretty junior back then, and I heard screaming coming from outside. Lots of screaming and panicking, and I was like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And some of us went to check. And when we went to check, it was a poor young lady who was very, very upset, in a lot of distress and clutching the side of her head.
Okay.
And she was screaming, it hurts, get it out, get it out. And that was when my nurse clicked in. She was like, oh, and we realized that there was a cockroach in her ear.
Really?
Yes.
What?
So it was obviously urgent and very distressing, and nobody's going to turn you away if you showed up
Oh my
with
gosh.
a cockroach in your ear. And we actually have like little bottles of olive oil on standby to drown those little creatures.
How you mean a cockroach can get into your ear?
Yeah.
You mean they're oh my gosh.
So we
Wasn't that in Singapore?
yes. So we squirted lots of olive oil in there, and the cockroach drowned,
Oh my gosh.
and it stopped wriggling, and the patient calmed down.
Oh
And then I had to overcome my personal fear of cockroaches. Because in that moment, I had to be the professional, right? It's like, I'm the doctor. Right, I'm the doctor. So I had to like get like a forceps, like, yes, I can see it. I'm going to be the professional here. And I reached him and pulled it out. And then obviously in my heart, like, oh God, don't let it come back alive. Don't let it come back alive. You know those cockroaches that fly?
laugh that
But yes, we welcome you to come to the emergency department.
I'm literally tearing up. I don't think I've teared.
So if you're unfortunate enough, yes, we welcome you to the emergency
So
department.
interesting. Oh my god, my tears. Good laughs, good tears. No, but it's interesting because you actually. First of all, how do you even know how to deal with this kind of situations? Like, do they even teach you in medical school what happens if a cockroach goes into someone's ear? So how do you know it's olive oil? Why can't it be water?
That's where we rely on my amazing nurses.
Okay.
So, my nurses are like, yep, seen this before. We know what to do. Here's the olive oil. Drown it, pull it out.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So as young junior doctors, you learn very quickly that, experienced good nurses are like your ultimate backbone support. They are the foundation. They run the place. They're the boss.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's also struck me that, when these kind of like unusual cases happen, it's not just the skill of taking it out, but it's your fear of the actual insect.
Yes. All right.
Right?
You got to overcome your humanly fear.
Yeah, and you have to
be a
act like
professional.
I'm
I got
calm.
this.
I got this.
I got this.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So that's not life-threatening but urgent. What's something that's life-threatening but not so urgent?
Well, I suppose in my line of work, I do diagnose a lot of life-changing conditions.
Okay.
For instance, I remember there was one case actually of a young woman who came in with headaches.
Okay.
And she had headaches probably for about a month.
Okay.
And the headaches were kind of like getting worse. They weren't going away. She wasn't under any particular stress. And she just continued taking Panadol. They kind of went away. They came back. And they went on for about a month. And she was very lucky because she had a very good GP.
Okay.
So I always advocate for people to go and get themselves a good family doctor, a good GP, because you need that continuity in your medical care.
To know your history.
To know your history, to know you well.
Right.
To go like, hey, there's something not quite right. So this young woman had headaches and her GP sent her in to the emergency department and said, look, I'm a bit worried about her. These headaches have been going on for a month, and they're getting worse.
I'm just curious, like, why would the GP send her to the emergency ward and not like a specialist?
I think at that point, the GP picked up that this was something that needed to be worked up urgently.
Right.
Yeah, and so the GP very rightly sent her in. And when she came, we assessed her. And I remember thinking to myself, it's not typical that we offer, for instance, a CT scan.
Right.
Because CT scans do come with their own risk as well.
Oh, what kind of risk?
A certain level of radiation, which,
Right.
we need to balance the diagnostics versus the risk of radiation.
Right. Is the radiation that high to
It is.
actually warrant?
I mean, CT scans, if you get them repeatedly, there is a certain level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So then this young woman came in and I looked at her and I had a conversation with her and I said to her, I get your GP's concerns and I also understand that you've had these headaches for quite a while.
Okay.
And sometimes if you go by the hard and fast rule, it may be like you don't necessarily need a CT scan today. But I looked at her and her GP had sent her in and she had concerns. I had maybe, it's what we call clinical gestalt. It's a feeling almost like
Clinical
a hunch. Gestalt.
Gestalt.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it comes a lot with experience as well.
Intuition.
Because, the people say that AI will replace doctors. I say it's really, really hard because AI will not have that gestalt where you look at someone and you piece everything together.
Okay.
And this young lady, we proceeded with a CT scan after I had a discussion with the senior doctor who was in the emergency department. And unfortunately, we found a very large brain tumor.
Right.
And it was a condition that was, life-altering.
Right. Okay.
So it's not necessarily urgent. Like, could she have been diagnosed in 1 or 2 weeks' time if she had gone to a specialist clinic? Potentially.
Yes.
But it was definitely life-threatening.
Right.
Enough to like, hey, And I remembered I managed to admit her to a inpatient and she would have gotten sorted and seen the oncologists and the neurosurgeons. And that's why I said I meet people in the worst day of their lives.
Right.
Because she would have come to the emergency department that day not thinking that she was going to get a life-altering diagnosis.
Yeah, I'm just very curious because, apart from your skills as a doctor, all these things that happen unexpectedly in terms of dealing with a situation where someone finds out for the first time that they have a brain tumor. There's a lot of emotional vulnerability.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotions that come up, right? So as a doctor, how do you deal with that as well?
I think I'm privileged in the sense that I am someone who has been comfortable sitting in the spaces of pain and vulnerability. And objectively, I have been told that it is a skill set of mine that I'm able to hold space. And in that sense, we call it's a very technical term, break bad news, breaking bad news.
Yeah.
And I do find that I gravitate towards this sort of scenarios where breaking bad news, holding space for someone in the worst day of their lives.
Yeah.
Whether it is attraction or gravitation, I find that I have I deal with a lot of these cases.
Right.
And for me, even when I speak to medical students or other junior doctors,
Yeah.
I do say to them that it's actually okay to cry with patients and their family members.
Interesting.
And I have, on occasions, cried with my patients.
Okay.
Not necessarily matching the emotional energy of like sobbing but allowing yourself to be human. Even in that moment, I've teared up a couple of times, even in Breaking Bad News.
Interesting.
I have held family members, as they've wailed and cried.
Wow.
And held them and cried with them, even in that moment.
Many people realize the emotional aspects of being a doctor.
Yes.
At least from someone who isn't a doctor, and a lot of times, patients or the families do expect a lot from the doctor. I mean, and actually, I now that you're sort of telling me about your experiences, actually, it takes a very empathetic doctor to actually be able to break bad news or to hold space for the patient, which is almost equally as important as treating the patient.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So would you say that's one of the underrated traits of becoming a good doctor?
I think we need all kinds of doctors.
Tell me more about that.
So you need doctors who are decisive and technical and almost like cough cough surgeons. Surgeons are typically very technical, very
non-feeling, or
I think it's important because they hold a knife. So when they hold the scalpel, they need a certain level of objectivity.
Interesting.
It's almost like they have to step back and go like detach. I'm dealing with this tumor, or I'm dealing with this part of the anatomy. And so it's also personality types that go to certain specialties.
Very interesting.
And so there's definitely room for diversity.
Interesting.
And obviously it's a normal curve. So everyone kind of sits on the curve as well. Different people have different levels of emotional detachment.
Right.
I find that for myself, on a personal level, I am able to compartmentalize quite well. So I do realize that I feel, I hold space, I'm vulnerable.
Yeah.
But quite quickly, you have to like switch, because the next thing you'll be like, oh, doctor, this person stuffed something up their butt and you need to pull it out. And you kind of have to like shift from, I'm so sorry, your significant loved one just died, to like, oh, okay.
Let's get this thing out of your butt.
Let's get this thing out of your butt.
Interesting. Let's talk about the butt one in a bit. But I just wanted to recognize the fact that it is actually not just the skills and the knowledge and the things that you pick up, but also your emotional mastery to move from one situation to another that actually makes you suitable for the job. It's
true,
right? And I also didn't realize this because I'm just thinking about even in banking, right? Different personas, different types of people also suit different jobs.
Yes.
Right? From surgeons to ER to
physicians,
pediatricians, there's certain personas, right? So actually that's very interesting for young people as well, looking to see what specializations.
It's true, to kind of like choose and see. And that's the thing with, the medical field. It's so diverse. Yeah. You really never know where you end up.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know. You really never know.
So you never know where you end up, meaning?
In terms of specialization, in terms of life, in terms of, I've got friends who are not even doctors these days. They go to medical school and they do a lot of other interesting things.
Right. Yeah. So, but in terms of the specialization, you get to choose, right?
You get to choose, but the specialization also chooses you, because it's applying for training programs and some of them are highly competitive.
Right.
So it's quite hard to get into some specialties.
Yeah, and also realizing that it doesn't mean that you want that course, means that that course is meant for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you never know what experiences you had in life that would take you to something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You said earlier that you had to switch from telling someone that maybe their loved one passed away to dealing with someone who has something up their butt. What is the most unusual thing that you had to remove from someone's body?
Actually, honestly, we don't remove them in the emergency department.
Oh.
Because if it's gotten to a point where it's way up there, we usually have to refer you to the surgeons to do a retrieval.
Okay, but what sort of things could you remove from in the ER?
Could we remove?
So things have gotten stuck up people's butt before?
Things have gotten stuck. Usually if it's stuck and it's outside, you can pull it out. So, but things that go further up, toothbrushes.
Toothbrushes?
Yeah, toothbrush, shampoo bottles.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is quite wow.
Yeah.
Why? Do you ask them like how? Why?
Not really. I think I grant my patients the dignity and privacy.
Also, you don't actually ask why?
No, we just go, whatever you tell us, we'll take it at face value.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you had to remove shampoo bottles.
Well, as in I've seen people have shampoo bottles up the bottom or a toothbrush. Or,
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
There was once I think we had a butter knife.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And those kind of things you actually have to deal with in the ER.
Well, we will image them and then basically send them to the surgeons.
Interesting. Okay. What is the most rewarding thing you've done in the ER that you find is worth mentioning?
I enjoy fixing broken bones. So it's a thing. It's very satisfying. It's very objective.
Put it on your LinkedIn. I enjoy fixing broken bones.
But obviously I don't do a good job like the orthopedic surgeons. But I do enough to like say if you've got a bone that's really badly broken, I can pull it straight, put it in a cast, send you to the surgeons, and they can decide if they want to put some pins or metalwork in there.
So does it then mean that within your, let's say 8 to 12 doctors, you kind of know what each person is good at or better at? Would it be?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So ER doctors are typically jack of all trades. We kind of have to know how to do quite a lot of things.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure about, the younger generation, but back in the day, there was this show called MacGyver, right?
Yes.
So we are known as the MacGyvers.
The Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, the Swiss Army knife, the modifications, and so ER doctors are typically known as the MacGyvers,
What is your biggest fear as an ER doctor?
I think failing our patients because of systemic problems. So understanding that, almost every system has its issues.
Yeah.
And so healthcare workers are under a lot of pressure because of systemic issues.
Such
as, we are a society that's getting older, aging population. So people are getting sicker, but the system may not necessarily be able to keep up with, the level of acuity that's coming our way. Or how when, COVID hit back then, it was like a lifetime ago, right?
Yeah.
But hospitals were overrun all across the world,
right?
And it's run by humans. So the system is staffed by humans and humans are limited.
Right.
So quite often people get frustrated when they come to the ER. They're like, oh, why am I waiting so long, or why did this happen? Or why isn't there a bed? Or why isn't there... But not realizing that a lot of times it is systemic in that sense. And everyone is working at it, whether it's the government or whether it is the hospitals. Everyone is working on it, but understanding that it's not necessarily that one person in front of you.
Right, that actually is sort of the bottleneck, right? It's actually the whole chain.
It's a whole chain.
Right, so does that mean then that there are increasing number of cases that the current staff isn't able to handle?
I think it's a worldwide problem. Worldwide problem that, healthcare systems are struggling.
Okay.
Aging population and, lifestyle issues for sure.
And therefore, preventative measures,
Absolutely.
right?
So preventative
Because
medicine
if you can't
is
solve
the
this,
thing.
you can't solve this
Exactly.
by yourself. So
Yeah.
as a person, an everyday person, it's to actually take care of yourself better.
And that's why I always advocate for a good family doctor, a good GP, link yourself into a good polyclinic locally.
And also better health habits, right?
Absolutely, yeah,
Right? Because
yeah.
when you take care of yourself, then you don't have to...
Then you don't have to meet me on the worst day of your life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, there are accidents, right, that happen. But, for the stuff that you can take care of yourself, having healthy habits every day, right?
Yeah.
I'm just curious because, you're an emergency doctor and, people just see you in the hospital. But there are also other situations and environments outside of the hospital that, I'm just thinking of those movies where, if something happens outside, you're like, doctor, is there a doctor here? Have you ever encountered those situations where you are needed as a doctor outside of the hospital?
Yeah. Sounds cliched, but it was on an aeroplane. Is there a doctor on board? Ding, ding.
Okay, tell me about that.
So, about a year ago now, I think, I was flying to the US for a personal holiday.
Okay.
So, it was a long haul flight. I was flying through Dubai. I had finished my Singapore to Dubai leg. And as I boarded in Dubai, I was like, okay, I need to sleep.
Okay.
So I got ready, I sat in my seat, and I think at that point I had ordered my drink and I took a melatonin.
In the airport?
No, in the plane.
Oh, in the plane from Dubai to US?
To New York, to JFK.
New York, okay.
So
just took your melatonin.
Yeah, took my melatonin, snuggled in, and then probably about 1 hour into the flight, there was the announcement, ladies and gentlemen, is there any doctor, nurse, or paramedic on board? Please identify yourself to the cabin crew.
And you were already a bit groggy?
I was probably getting ready to get a snooze in.
Okay.
And that was when I went, oh, okay.
And because it's not a sleeping pill, it's melatonin.
Melatonin just helps you get relaxed and drowsy.
Exactly, but it doesn't
but it doesn't knock you out.
Knock you out, right?
So it's easily overcome by adrenaline because it's essentially a sleepy hormone.
Okay.
But once you have adrenaline kick in, your body goes, okay, fine.
I was about to
say,
I
won't sleep then.
If it was a sleeping pill, you wouldn't be.
Yes, it was a sleeping pill, I would have been out.
Okay, so you heard the announcement.
So I heard the announcement. I kind of thought, probably one of those. I've attended before in the past when people had a little faint or something.
Okay.
So I identified myself to the crew and they said, oh, could you come and see this passenger? So I got escorted to see this passenger. And the passenger was this lady who was traveling from India to US, who didn't speak a word of English and was traveling by herself.
Okay.
And I could see she was very breathless.
Okay.
So very short of breath. And the crew at that point had already started giving her some oxygen.
Okay.
So I looked at her and I did an assessment. And it was great because most long haul flights will have a medical kit.
Right.
Which they can open if you're a doctor on board. So I identified myself. I had to show them some form of identity as well.
Okay.
For them to verify because they had to make sure I was actually a doctor.
Yeah.
So showed them my ID and we opened the medical kit.
Okay.
Inside there was a stethoscope, there were a few other things.
Yeah.
So I assessed this lady and it turned out...
Is this the first time it happens to you?
The first time I've had to open a medical kit.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I opened the medical kit and I assessed her with the stethoscope and the blood pressure machine and a few other things. And I figured out, based on what she looked like, that it was very likely she had fluid overload in her lungs.
Fluid overload?
Yeah, and that's quite common in older patients who have heart and lung problems.
Right.
And she was quite breathless.
Right.
And the problem with this is when you fly, the air is much thinner up in the higher atmosphere. So she was obviously not coping with the thinner atmosphere.
Okay.
And she was getting very breathless. So I looked at her and I opened up the kit and I kind of ruffled a little. And there were some medications I could give her that would help.
Right.
And so there I was up in the air.
Yeah.
And I had to put a drip in her. So grab some needles, clean, put a drip in her, gave her the medication.
And all this was in her seat?
Well, in her seat. And I remembered I was in this little, it was next to the galley. And I was in a little aisle, cramped down. I had to like get on my knees,
Yeah.
put a drip in her.
Wow,
And, you know, as we know, even putting a drip on ground level in a hospital trolley, it's hard enough sometimes, let alone up there with a little bumpy plane.
Interesting.
So we did all of that. I gave her the medications. She was still guzzling lots of oxygen at this point.
Right.
And the crew were very helpful, obviously. And they were in touch with the ground staff as well, saying, hey, you know, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
It was one of those big A380s.
Yes.
So they had two captains.
Okay.
The captain that was in between came and spoke to me and said, so what do you think? And I said, well, we are 1.5, 2 hours into I think it would have been a 14-hour flight from Dubai to JFK. And I said, what do you want to do? And at that point, we were going over Western Europe.
Yeah.
And I think the captain was like, well, there's Manchester Airport. And they were kind of thinking about it.
So at that point, you felt that she needed medical attention.
Yes, for sure.
Right.
Because she needed to be somewhere where they could give her higher levels of oxygen.
Right.
She needed more medications through the drip.
Otherwise, could she have died?
Potentially, she would have become very, very sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, I obviously didn't have the things to look after her. And it wasn't safe. And so, but we kept flying.
Right.
Because at that point, they were also liaising with the ground crew.
Okay.
Eventually, about 2 hours later, the captain came and said again, so how is she doing? And I said, well, you know, she's still on oxygen. The medication I gave her might have worked a little bit, but she needs a hospital.
Right.
And that was when they went, oh, we're about to go over the North Pole.
Okay.
And if we go over the North Pole, it is nothing for the next 5 to 6 hours because...
because it's just...
It's nothing, right? I was like, we can't go land and look for Santa Claus, right?
Okay.
So that was when I think the captain and the ground crew had to make a call. And so they said, okay, we're going to decide what's happening next. And after they liaised with the ground crew, they decided, okay, we were going to land in Iceland.
Awesome.
That was going to be the last frontier before we went over the North Pole.
Right.
And it was so last minute that we couldn't even land in
a proper airport
at Reykjavik. I think we had to land in like a regional airport called Keflavik or something. And it was so small that it could barely handle an A380.
Yeah, because you need enough runway.
I think the captain did an amazing job at landing at this little regional airport.
Wow.
And it was so small, they didn't even have the aero bridges to reach the A380. They had to push a dinky stairs.
Wow,
that just got to the economy level.
Yeah.
To like come and pick up. And the paramedics came on and took the lady off. And so that was an interesting experience for me to go like, hey, I landed a jumbo A380.
Yeah.
But it was still terrifying in that moment because you're kind of like, oh crap, you know?
Yeah, because they rely on you to actually make
in
a
that
judgment
moment.
call.
There was a judgment
because
call.
Because if you said like she doesn't need it.
Yes, I think they were kind of hoping that I said that, but I went, nah, I don't think we could keep going for another 5-6 hours.
In those moments, would you think that you would want to lean a bit more on the conservative side?
In terms of
her health, right? Like you would rather choose that we land and take her to the hospital than to just let her stay
So
up
I
in
think
the
one
air.
of the things as emergency physicians, we learn to weigh the risk.
Okay.
It's a lot of it is risk stratification is what we call it.
Tell me more.
So we need to make a judgment call, and we've got a lot of what we call clinical tools. A lot of very clever people have done very clever studies in terms of like, if you're in this category, what's your risk? This.
Right.
But sometimes it really is a judgment call.
Yeah.
In that moment where you go like, hey, what do we do? Is she going to deteriorate in the next 5-6 hours?
Yes.
What are our resources? What's going on?
Yeah.
And I was very mindful of the fact that we're in a cramped space up in the air.
Yeah.
Resources were limited.
Yeah.
She could get very sick.
Right.
Even oxygen was limited if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because she was essentially using the oxygen tanks that were reserved for the crew.
Right.
And so even, the crew had to have a certain protocol that only a certain amount of tanks can be used up.
Right.
Should there be a drop in cabin pressure?
Right. Would you require all those information to actually make a judgment call, or for you it was just the patient?
No, I definitely took that into account. Yeah, because they were updating me as well. They were like, hey, we have this many tanks.
Right.
We have, and I think that's probably where my experience as an emergency doctor kind of kicked in, where I'm used to taking in quite raw data.
Yeah.
Because you're very undifferentiated when you come to the emergency department. And I'm used to hey, very undifferentiated.
Yeah.
And make decision.
Right.
Piece things together.
Problem solving.
Yeah.
Right. Which not everyone would be able to do in terms of doctors, because if you're a specialist, you might be only used to taking certain sets of data because you're a generalist,
Yes,
kind of.
very much so. Very
Right.
much so. In a almost like a oxymoron, we were specialist generalists. We specialize in being generalists because you need to be able to look at big pictures, pick things up, see patterns. One patient with chest pain with the second patient with chest pain could be two very different things altogether.
Interesting.
And you need to be able to pick that up.
You need to be able to pick that up and piece the different. It's like a bit like an investigator.
Yeah.
Right. Wow, I love that story.
Yeah.
Well done. So after that, after you land and then you just
So we dropped her off in Iceland, hung out in Iceland for about 2 hours, and
then went out
off
again.
Yeah.
Right. And did they give you a thank you?
They were very generous. They gave me some frequent flyer points.
Oh,
It was
okay.
very nice.
Okay. Wow, that's an amazing story. I think that those are the situations and the times where you feel like you're proud to be a doctor.
Yes. I actually came back from that trip and wrote a social media post about that particular incident. And I contrasted that with the fact it was a trip by myself to go and meet my husband who was at work. And I wrote a post about how I had left my 2 girls with the grandmother in Singapore when I went on this trip.
That was meant to be.
And that was meant to be because if I was managing my 2 girls, it would have been very hard for me to step up.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think I was reflecting on the fact that we often forget that in society, mothers are very, very important.
Yes.
But if the expectation of mothers is that they stay at home and do the child rearing, we could potentially be depriving society of some amazing individuals who need to be out there.
Right.
So if, for instance, a lawyer who is a mother decides that, hey, I can only be a mother and not be a lawyer at the same time, then we are potentially depriving the world of someone who could be, fearlessly ethical in her work and thriving and pushing for justice wherever she is. Or the fact that, a lot of mothers are also professionals as teachers.
Yes.
And our children are actually benefiting from the fact that they have showed up to work as teachers, even though they are also juggling their roles as mothers as well.
Yeah.
And my reflection from that particular case was that it is so important to support women and working mothers to be able to thrive both on the home front and the work front, because we don't want to deprive the world of the skill sets that they bring.
Yeah, I love that reflection. I think I resonate with it very much as well, because it's interesting how that was quite one of your main reflections.
Yes.
Even though you actually saved a life, but actually it was more your inner reflection of how you could do that because someone else was also looking after your kids.
Yes, so to have, I think grandma was here at that point together with my helper. The 2 of them were looking after the kids.
Yeah.
And I didn't even mention, I wasn't even meant to be on that flight initially.
Tell me.
I had switched flights to a day earlier because my mother-in-law had come earlier and said, oh, you know what? I can handle the kids. So I went, okay, there was a flight available and I switched flights.
Interesting.
So amazingly.
I love this.
Yeah, the fact was I wasn't even meant to be on that flight.
I love
But
this.
the spontaneity of it meant that I was there and was able to help.
Yeah, you were
that
meant to
lady.
be there to help the lady. Oh, wow, I love this. It's all synchronicities and, every step of the way, nothing is random. How we met is not random as well in terms of who you meet, what you needed to have cancelled, what you needed to have,
Yeah, and just saying yes, right?
saying yes, trusting. Oh my God, I love it. You were meant to do that. And I think the reflection, let's talk about a little bit about, having kids and being a doctor or just having kids and
Or
being
just
a
having
full-time,
kids,
a full-time career person as well. Because I think we talked about it, right? Is it easier to be an ER doctor or to be a mom?
ER doctor, 100% ER doctor.
Right?
So I sometimes joke, but not really joke, that it is easier to run a full CPR resuscitation, deal with the chaos of, intravenous lines and bringing someone's heart back to life, than to deal with my 5-year-old who is demanding for me to cut her sandwiches in triangles, but not the triangles that I have cut.
Oh my gosh. I totally get it. It's actually like a job as a mom is so much harder than anything else.
Yeah. And but what I love is one of the things my girls have said to me. So I'm actually part-time. So I've kind of juggled my shifts in a way where I don't work full-time.
Okay.
But my girls know that I work and they know that mommy is a doctor. And we talk about gender stereotypes. Growing up, doctor usually meant male, older. But what really warmed my heart was probably a few months ago, my girl said to me, Mommy, this boy in school says he wants to be a doctor.
Yeah.
You mean boys can be doctors too?
Wow.
And where you go, girl?
Yeah, because their role model is the mom.
Because to them, doctors are moms and females.
I love it because it seems so small, but actually it's so significant in how we each have a part to play to be role models for anyone who believes that that's not possible.
Yes.
Right?
So I think, that definitely if I can sort of even encourage women of the younger generation and this generation is to just keep role modeling. You never know who is actually looking at you and going like, hey, you mean boys can be doctors too? Which I love it.
Yeah, or like girls cannot be something, cannot be in this role, but actually anybody can be who they choose to be if they believed that they can do it.
Yes. And with a lot of support,
Yeah.
And so I really truly believe I can be where I am today with the support that I've had from the village that we found ourselves in here in Singapore.
Yeah. Oh my God. I think we can talk forever.
I think so.
Yeah. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions at the end, a bit of rapid fire. For a young person who wants to enter medicine or emergency medicine, what would you tell them?
Can I be a bit cynical and say don't do it?
Yeah, of course. Wow.
I think you really need to think about what you're getting yourself into.
Interesting.
So, and I would much rather say that, you want to consider the cons. The pros, yeah, sure, they'll come along the way. But you really want to consider the cons, almost like a lowest level denominator. Like if the cons is that you would give up, your stability of like a routine life of 9 to 5, Mondays to Fridays, are you able to deal with shift work?
Right.
Are you able to deal with being perpetually jet lagged if you do night shifts?
Yeah.
Are you able to deal with the fact that for a big part of your life, you may not necessarily make it to a lot of social gatherings with your friends,
Yeah.
Even attending like weddings and major life events needs to be carefully
Never
planned.
thought about that.
I have a really good girlfriend who is also an emergency doctor.
Yeah.
And every month we will have to go through like, is your roster out? Is my roster out?
Right.
Can we somehow tee up a moment in our roster where we can meet up? And understanding that it is not a typical life,
Yes.
especially for shift work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the pros is that the diversity of medical field, I guess,
Yeah.
there's so many ways you can express yourself
Yeah,
and your skill
get
sets in medicine.
What keeps you going then?
I love it though. I absolutely love emergency medicine.
Passion.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, it's passion. For me is I get a kick out of solving
Okay.
puzzles
Yeah.
when I get to work.
Yeah.
I get the kick out of when I follow up on a case and I go like, hey, I was right.
Yeah, okay.
Because you get that satisfaction.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if there was one trait that an emergency doctor needs? What would that be?
One trait, I think definitely flexibility.
Okay.
So being flexible in your thinking, being flexible in your lifestyle.
We talk about go with the flow, right?
Yes, going with the flow.
Yeah.
Because things are very dynamic.
Tell them what you said to me earlier in the restroom. That I would be.
Or that you would make a great emergency doctor in a different life. Actually, you know what? You want to try it?
I was like, that's the biggest compliment that
Absolutely.
anyone has paid me in a while. Thank
because
you.
going with the flow is so important because it's dynamic.
Yeah.
So, in medicine, but particularly emergency medicine,
Yeah.
it's such a dynamic form of medicine.
Yeah.
It's like I can literally have someone go, I'm like, oh, okay, you look well. I could walk away, check on you in like 10 minutes time and go like, oh, you're not breathing. I need to like start CPR and bring you back to life.
Yeah, you need to go with the
Yeah.
flow, adapt, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and adapt to the
Okay.
moments.
I know you like to watch Netflix. What is your favorite Netflix movie, or what are you watching right now?
Right now, I suppose talking about emergency medicine, people ask, The Pit on HBO Max is actually really realistic.
And it's about
emergency
Okay.
medicine. And my
Okay.
friends are like, why would you watch
Yeah.
something that reminds you of work? But I think we get the kick out of it. Plus, Noah Wale is really, really good looking.
I get it. It always helps. It's just like lawyers watching Suits, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So we like to like pick it apart and
Okay.
enjoy it. So
Last question: if you weren't a doctor, what would you do?
if I weren't a doctor, I think I would like to do something creative.
Okay.
I like words. I think we talked about it earlier that
Yeah.
I might have been a journalist.
Okay.
But I've got a couple of other things brewing along and we can talk more
Yes.
about the next time.
I will. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking time today. I think I've never laughed that much on a podcast.
I did not think that would be the story that would make you laugh as much.
Yeah, this is the first time I ever laughed so much on a podcast.
I love it.
I think a lot of interesting insights you provided. So thank you so much, Wai Wai.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, well done.